It's a very different show nowadays. Hello, everyone. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and my name is Joanne. It's Thanksgiving weekend, so it just wouldn't make any sense to start carrying this incredibly vital message before giving thanks to all of the people this weekend who have worked tirelessly to put on the 65th annual Northern Lights Roundup, so thank you. A very special thank you to John and Christine, who I only just met in person last year at the Kamloops Roundup, but did get to know digitally during COVID, as John was just saying. For inviting me here, to Dewey and his wife Brandy, who came and sought me out at the airport because we just happened to be on the same flight here today, to help me feel comfortable, and to my very special friend Rio, who is putting me up at her house this weekend, so it's a pleasure to get to know you better. We know each other quite well in service, but it'll be great to get to know you personally, and for the spaghetti dinner that you made me earlier. It's all about the snacks. I don't actually find myself particularly all that interesting. What I do find is that the message and what can happen as a result of this message being carried to somebody suffering or dying of alcoholism, what can result from that is incredible. And when I am asked to speak, it's precious to me because of where I have been, because of where I should have ended up, because I shouldn't be here. So, I see all these beautiful, smiling, happy faces, and although I am so grateful to see each and every one of you, I hope that there's a girl like me somewhere in the back of the room, and so I hope that what I say tonight gets through to you. I was born in the late 70s in a small town called Stockport in Manchester in England. I was born into a family already at toxic level of alcoholism. All of the men in my family are afflicted. I got a great genetic lottery. If you didn't get alcoholism, you got serious mental health problems, and if you were really lucky, you got both. So you can imagine what my childhood was like. Friday and Saturday nights in our home were a battleground. And I learned very early on how to survive in my own home. It gave me wildly unhealthy coping skills, which I still carry some of today. But I am not describing anything to you that made me alcoholic. Because I'm the youngest of 3 kids. There's some other kids floating around, but at that time I was the youngest of 3 kids. And my 2 older sisters are not alcoholic. They certainly have had their difficulties, that they've needed to get help. But this idea that somehow my upbringing or my experiences as a young child created alcoholism, I believed that, all the way through my struggles later on. That, if you had grown up the way that I grew up, you would drink this way too. And at a very, very young age, I decided that my parents were unqualified to take care of me. And the minute I could walk out the door without the ministry getting involved, I was leaving. And I think it's probably important at this point to let you know that today, Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a beautiful relationship with both my parents. But that relationship did not look beautiful as a small child. I left as soon as I could. I left with all of the survival skills that I could possibly muster. I ended up in care, foster care. I rotated through various homes. I would run away. I would break the law. I would do whatever it is that I had to do in order to survive. And I felt fine with that. Because if you were raised the way that I was raised, then you would do everything you could to keep yourself safe too. So that is how I lived. Wildly terrified and insecure all of the time, constantly in fight or flight. But the thing that I was afraid of most is that you would know how terrified I was. And so I spent a huge portion of my youth developing the kind of armor that I think, I'm seeing a lot of women nod, the kind of armor that keeps everyone away, right? I had terrible social anxiety. I didn't know how to carry on a conversation with people. Going to school, I didn't bail out of school because I just didn't want to be there. I couldn't be there. I didn't know how to function in a social environment. All I knew how to do was run. And then I took a drink. And all that insecurity went away. Suddenly I knew how to socialize. Suddenly I knew how to be amongst people. Suddenly everything felt right. And I thought, well, this is the deal, right? Like, if I can just live in this zone of the effect of like 6 to 9 drinks, I don't have to, I don't have to live terrified, right? I can be the person that I've always wanted to be. And it worked for a very short period of time, because almost immediately, and without me really realizing it, I had a really hard time keeping it from 6 to 9 drinks. A really hard time. And, when it was in my younger years, I would do some stupid stuff, and I would kind of regret it the next day, and then my friends would be like, oh yeah, you did this and you did that, and we'd all laugh about it, and it seemed fine, so, no harm, no foul. What I know now that I didn't understand then is that series of experiences would get worse. It would get unbelievably worse. In my late teens is when I first started considering that maybe I shouldn't be drinking. This is around the time that I met the most important person in my life. And he liked to drink too. And he would reassure me that whatever happened the night before was not that bad. It was that bad. But we entered into those kinds of relationships, right? Because we gravitate towards people who make us feel better about the condition that we're in. And we involve them in our, I'm not going to swear at the podium. I'm not going to do it. We involve them in what ends up becoming the toxicity that not only kills us, but it kills any sort of relationship around us. But in the beginning, it doesn't seem that bad, right? Oh, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't drink that much. Maybe you shouldn't take that stuff when you drink. Maybe you shouldn't drink with that person, right? These are all confirming the thoughts that I'm having, during a shaky hangover. But we love to drink together, right? We like to party, we like to go camping, we like to do, we just didn't want it to stop. And what I also know now that I didn't understand then is that he enjoyed drinking as much as I did, but he was able to moderate. If there was something important going on the next day, or something important happened, while we were drinking together, he would stop and go and attend to this more important issue. And that just made no sense to me whatsoever, right? Even then, I never questioned why, once I got started, I had very, very little control over the amount that I would take. I would even observe other people starting and stopping. And I would think to myself, wow, that's really weird. Like, who who just puts down a half a glass of whiskey and walks away. Like, that's just, what's that about, right? Later in our life, like, he'd be out mowing the lawn, and I'd call him half beers, because he'd be out mowing the lawn and his beer would go warm. First of all, who lets a beer go warm? Second of all, he would put it down. I didn't want it anymore. What? You know? Like, these little clues very early on that just, they never once made me check in with myself or consider that something was abnormal about me. What I didn't like were the consequences, right? We'd go out, we'd have a good time. He'd be like, it's time to go home. I don't want to go home. Like, the late night last call guy is on his way. I'm not going anywhere, right? And he would leave and go home because he needed to get up for his job, or he had some sort of family engagement the next day. But once I put alcohol in my body, I was not going anywhere else except back for another drink, right? And I would engage in other things that would allow me to continue drinking for as long as I possibly could. My relationship with my mother is a complicated one, even still today, although we do the best that we can. But somewhere in my early teen years, she really wanted me to come home. And so she did what she could with what she had. And she left my father. And she started engaging in this sort of late 80s, early 90s self-help craze that was going on at the time. A lot of self-help books, engaged in some meetings for adult children of alcoholics, and insisted that I come home, I stay home, and that I attend Alateen meetings, something I had no intention of doing. But, you know, on the occasion where I would need a place to stay, I would appease her and go. And I can't really tell you what happened in those meetings. What I can tell you from today is it was the beginning of something that I would need later on. Because I don't recall anybody speaking in those meetings, and I don't really recall the content or the format or who chaired them or what was even being said. What I do know is that it was the beginning of knowing that alcoholism existed, and that possibly there was a solution somewhere for it. Completely disregarded at the time, this was a seed planted, you know, for later. I didn't think it was important information. I just needed some money and a place to stay, and this is what I had to do for an hour in order to get what I needed. I think often about the people in our sister fellowship, the Al-Anon family groups that put on those kinds of meetings that made sure that there was AA literature and that there was some information. And I think about my life in general service now and how they kind of parallel. I think about those things often. When I started to consider that I needed possibly to stay away from alcohol in my late teens, it did not once occur to me that quitting wouldn't be an option. It would just simply be a matter of deciding. And at around 18, began the long and hard-fought, painful journey of trying to keep myself sober. And it didn't work. My sobriety date is August 24th, 2014. I walked into my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in early April of 2007. And Alcoholics Anonymous had been finding me periodically well before then. I married that young man. We are still married today. Our marriage looks very different than it did in the beginning. I would love to tell you that my late teens and my repeated attempts to stay sober resulted in hard work, some successes, but really all it was absolutely horrifying to watch. I would build myself up, and I would tear myself down And each time I tore myself down, it just took one more chunk out of me. And it just took me a little longer to get up each time. See, the way that I grew up had kind of shaped me to not ask for help. That being vulnerable and reaching out my hand would make me highly unsafe. So even when people tried to help, I couldn't receive it. I didn't know how. And all I could hear was my father's words in the back of my head. Get it together. Just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get it done. Right? Stop hanging out with those people. Stop drinking that stuff. Stop going to those places. All the while confirming to me that the problem was outside of me, right? It was the people. It was the places. It was the things. That if I could just get these things in order, somehow, maybe I'd control and enjoy my drinking. Probably not. But certainly I could stay away from drinking if I could just get these things in order. And when I came to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in 2007, that's what I heard in meetings. I would hear, just don't pick up. You'll get it if you want it enough. Come to 90 meetings in 90 days, which incidentally is a court order, not actually a principle in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's something judges used to give out. It's not actually a suggested part of our program. Hang out with the winners. And so really well-meaning women would cross the floor at the end of a meeting and try to talk to me. And sometimes I would listen, and sometimes I would even buy in, and I would try to reinvent myself. This is what I'm going to be now. I'm going to be a sober person. I'm going to be like one of these women. So I would go home and change my attire and dye my hair and just become a different person. And this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go to meetings, I'm going to hang out with these people, and I'm going to stay sober, and I'm going to change my life. And sometimes it would last a couple of weeks. A few times it lasted a few months. Some of those incredibly unhealthy coping skills allowed me to speak well. So I could hide, right, in AA. Well, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about. And it was good. It would keep people away from me, right? She knows what she's doing. She's fine. Sure, she was here last week with puke in her hair, but no, she's washed her hair. She's sorted herself out. She certainly smells a lot better. She's fine. And I know that something within me made me wildly unapproachable as well. I was incredibly difficult to get through to. What I don't recall anybody ever doing was suggesting to me that perhaps I might need a change. Not a change of clothes, not a change of hair color, not a shower. A change sufficient enough to bring about recovery from something. And if I didn't fully understand what that something was, how could I possibly seek a solution to it? And to be honest with you, I really didn't think there was a solution in Alcoholics Anonymous. Amongst with all of my hiding and just kind of trying to stay out of trouble. I don't know if anybody in the room used to say, I'll go back to AA, right? It just kind of gave you a bit of a stay of execution from the friends and family that were angry at you about whatever happened the last time. But these seeds had been planted frequently and often throughout my youth. I can recall, turning myself in for an active warrant in my early 20s. And back then, you'd turn yourself in the night before whatever particular type of court you needed to show up for, so you didn't have to spend a couple of days in jail waiting for court. And, they're rolling around a cart in the Surrey holding cells. People are getting People magazines, National Geographics. It keeps everybody calm and collect in their cells while they're waiting to go up to court. And I got a whole stack of pamphlets from Alcoholics Anonymous and 3 application forms for various treatment centers. I smelled, right? Like all the while, these like seeds have been planted. But when I found myself finally in Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not think there was a solution here for what was wrong with me. And a lot of it was because I would sit in meetings and I would listen to laughter and this conviviality, and people are chatting with each other before the meeting and they're chatting with each other after the meeting, and everybody looks good and they're driving decent vehicles, and there's just something going on with them that's not going on with me. And in those meetings I would hear, gratitude lists, peppered with some people who were still struggling with life. You heard one of 2 things. You heard sheer gratitude or consequences, right? My license has been taken away, my kids have been taken away. What I wasn't hearing was the symptoms of alcoholism. I didn't know in those moments that that's what I needed to hear. All I knew is that I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I was not relating to any of it. And nice women who would take me for cups of coffee after the meeting and kind of just spend time with me. I mean, I appreciated the effort, but I didn't know how to relate to them. I had no social skills. And usually it only took a couple of weeks before I would show up at same said meeting drunk, because I couldn't stay sober. And what I didn't know is that Alcoholics Anonymous, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, is designed for those of us who can't actually stay sober. And I didn't have access to that message. I am so grateful to this fellowship. Please do not misread what it is that I mean. What I mean is that our meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous are designed for us to carry this message to that girl in the back of the room, to that man in the back of the room, to whomever needs it, right? This is the vehicle that we use in order to execute our 12-step work. And the meetings I was attending, there was no 12-step work going on. There was just gratitude lists and grievances and consequences and drunkalogs, and I wasn't relating to any of it. I would come and go from the fellowship. The consequences got incredibly worse. My husband left. He has the kind of job that takes him on the road for significant periods of time. And each time he was unsure if he was going to walk into our home to me dead inside it. And I had no capacity to have any empathy for what that was like for him. All I heard was complaining, right? And so I had no ability to put myself in his shoes, what that must be like. I couldn't even put myself in my own shoes. All I knew was how to pick up and check out. That's all I knew. And so the people who loved me most, the people who I had allowed in because I was getting something out of the relationship, I couldn't even let them in anymore either. And I would kind of just show up at our local Alano club in various states. Sometimes, the end of a 7-day stretch where I would feel maybe I'm getting somewhere. Sometimes I would come in the night after. Sometimes the night hadn't ended and I was still loaded. And I came in contact with somebody who was struggling just as much as I was. And she started talking about a solution to this thing. And I'm like, what solution? Like, there is no solution. There's just pulling myself up by my bootstraps and heading to a meeting and struggling to stay sober for 7 to 10 days and then drinking again and disappearing and not knowing where I'd ended up and how I got there, and then rolling back into a meeting and grabbing another 24-hour chip. Like, it's just an endless, awful amusement ride, and I want to die. That's how I feel. It was like the first time that I had ever actually just been honest with anyone. And I just uttered the words, I cannot take another breath inside my own skin. I can't do it. I can't live with it, and I can't live without it. I just don't want to be here anymore. And she said, let's go to a big book study. Whatever, man. Fine. Her and her friend hopped in the front seat of a car. They loaded me into the back seat of a car. We drove from Langley, where we live, into Vancouver. And I sat in the back of a big book study, and I hated every moment of it. All I could do was imagine the raging argument I was going to have with the guy after the meeting that was running the meeting. But this is what went on inside of my head all of the time, right? Just a fight all of the time, fight against any information being presented to me. I had tried so many solutions to my alcoholism, I didn't think anything would ever work. We'd tried therapy, we'd tried group counseling, we'd tried one-on-one counseling, we tried something weird called neuro-linguistic programming. I mean, if we thought that shaking a chicken foot at my alcoholism might have worked, we would have done it, right? I had lost everything. I had lost my ability to work. I had lost my ability, what minimal ability I had to have relationships with other people. I had lost the ability to take care of myself in any way, shape, or form. I was not drinking to have a good time anymore. I was drinking because I was not capable of doing anything else. Breathing in and out sober hurt. Not physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I couldn't handle any day sober. And we would go to these meetings, people are like, my worst days sober, oh my gosh, you know? I'm so happy that I'm sober. I'm like, there's something else wrong with me that is not wrong with a person that thinks that sobriety is the answer to all of their problems. Sobriety felt worse, right? And so sitting at the back of this big book study, it's a little like Morse code, right? Like every sixth or seventh word is actually making it into my conscience. And I'm hearing words like allergy and phenomenon, mental twist, right? Step one experience, the inability to stay sober no matter how great the necessity or wish. I'm like, what? What? That's what happens to me, right? But I'm not talking to that guy that runs the big book study. Forget it. Forget it. And for a few months, I would just, if they were going, I would hop in the car. And at some point in those few months, I definitely found it very easy to concede that something was happening to me bodily when I put alcohol in my system. I knew and understood that many years ago, when I would drink, something seemed right about the feeling, the effect that alcohol gave me. But I had not felt that in a long time. Like, I had lost that relief that alcohol gave me a long time ago. So why was I continuing to do this? If it wasn't actually solving any of my problems, if I could freely admit that it was just creating more, right? Why did I continue to do this past the point that I didn't even want to live? And I couldn't have possibly set myself up to start asking those questions accurately. I didn't have a basic understanding of what I was up against. Something definitely happened to me bodily when I put alcohol in my body that didn't happen to other people that I knew. It didn't happen to my husband, right? When he didn't want to have the rest of his drink, he just didn't have the rest of his drink. That seemed very foreign to me, right? We would have a video of me, right? Unconscious, not conscious, eyes closed, drool out of the side of my mouth, and my body is still crawling to a bottle in a campsite. This is not, a mental control issue in this moment. Something is bodily happening to an individual who does that. And this was the first time I was starting to hear that information. And people had tried to take me through the big book. But we well-intentioned people could see what kind of serious state I was in and thought the responsible thing to do would be to rip me through a step 4 as quickly as possible, missing all of this vital information. So when they would rip me through a step 4 as quickly as possible, I'm getting the impression that what I need to know is more about myself and my triggers and, how to be a better person. And instilling in me principles I couldn't possibly live up to. I didn't have the capacity to. I was missing this vital piece, which was the problem of alcoholism itself and what I was up against. And how if somebody has drifted into this area, right, where they may be beyond human aid, there is no solution that I can apply myself. There is no way to pull myself up by my bootstraps. Every single one of those attempts was hard fought. But it wasn't because there was something wrong with me as a human being. It was because I was up against something I had no power to control. I can remember vividly feeling great relief and utter terror when I really realized for the first time that I had never had the capacity to fight my own alcoholism. Because two truths kind of exist in that, right? None of this has been necessarily my fault. That the strong desire to stop had always been there, but even the strongest desire is of absolutely no avail when it comes to that second symptom of alcoholism. And then that sheer terror comes in, because you realize there's nothing you can do. And it was in that moment that I realized that the rest of the steps, I had misunderstood them. That it wasn't about getting to know myself better. It wasn't about avoiding these people, places, or things. It wasn't even about arranging my life in a way that I could digest it or live it. It was about experiencing a change sufficient enough to bring about recovery from alcoholism, and that was absolutely 100% possible. And somebody said to me, I've never seen anybody go through this process and maintain it that's ever relapsed. And I thought, challenge accepted. Fine, spiritual solution? Sure. I need to believe in a power greater than myself? Sure. Remember, I would have shaken a chicken foot at it if I could, so I did not balk at the God word. The spirituality of the program was not an issue for me. I was the person that was completely and utterly willing to die if I had to live inside my own body for one more day. So, sign me up. And so I did the inventory. I hated every moment of it. I did the 5th step. Didn't enjoy that either. Book says, now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Didn't think that I was having one. Understood the information being presented in steps 6 and 7. Was willing to apply those principles. Made a list. And shared all along the way with those who were trying to help me that I didn't think this was working. But while this was happening, I was staying sober. On my 3rd amends, which was a tricky one, I was unsure how I was going to approach a situation with some friends who had stopped talking to me many years before. I interfered in their marriage. We'll just leave it at that. I thought, there's no way I can't get in touch with him. It will injure her. If I get in touch with her, it may injure him. There's no way to, good, solid, responsible sponsorship said, pray about it, set it aside, move on to the next one. And on my regular Monday night meeting, I felt something behind me and turned around, and there they both were in the door of my home group. I hadn't seen them in 5 years. She was struggling. He was struggling. I immediately think I need to run across the room because God's giving me some sort of, I want to make an amends, right? Something stops me. These people are not here so that I can make an amends. Perhaps maybe they're having their own struggles and it's got nothing to do with me. What a concept. We had a friendly exchange. We exchanged numbers. Some days later, she texted me, said, can we get together? I drove to her home, and every fiber of my being was on fire. I have never had that kind of anxiety before in my life. Everything in me was telling me to turn the car around, call her and tell her you're sick, call her and tell her that you can't make it, call her and tell her you had to work late. Those things that we do to avoid the things that we have to do. The phone rings. Well, first, no, I prayed. God, remove this fear. Direct my attention to what you would have me be in this moment. God, remove this fear. Direct my attention to what you would have me be in this moment, over and over and over and over and over again. This is what I was told to do. Have this relationship, interact with it, apply these principles into action, right? Faith without works is dead. Fine, I'll try it. Almost immediately after praying, my phone rings. It's a girl that I've been in contact with who's struggling. She's having a bad day. I get to talk to her for 10 minutes, and the car just drives itself to the amends. I find myself in the driveway, girl's doing better on the phone, I walk in. I get to do a 12th step. She gets to have a first step. I get to do a 9th step. It's not about me getting absolved of all of the guilt and shame and remorse that I had over what it is that I did. I got to be honest with her. I watched the relief wash over her face. Some of those broken pieces just got put back together. This is how God shows up in my life. This is what it's about. This is the beginning of the spiritual experience I was promised. And so now, after 9 years of sobriety, a repaired marriage, a good relationship with my parents, outside help because I needed it, I get to show up once a week and do a big book study and be the person that the girl at the back of the room is angry at. Yeah. But then I get to connect with her and help her. In recent years, I needed something beyond just that one-on-one 12-step work. If I was going to grow, if I was going to earn some of those social skills that I didn't have. And now I get to work for those people that I'll probably never meet. And for the last, I think, 6 or 7 years, I've been involved heavily in general service. Because I think it's vitally important to be one of those people that makes sure that those pamphlets made it into that jail cell. Because I think it's vitally important to work together with other fellowships to make sure that access to Alcoholics Anonymous makes it into an Alateen meeting. Because there's a drunk girl somewhere that doesn't know that there's a solution to the thing that's killing her. And that's why we do what we do. I don't go to meetings because I need meetings. I go to meetings because it's where we do our 12-step work, right? I need to do 12-step work. If I begin to serve inwardly, right? When I stop serving outwardly, I start to serve inwardly. It gets really uncomfortable in a hurry, right? I start thinking about all the things that I need. I need more time to myself. I need to do less. My husband's like, you need to do more. Don't you have an assembly coming up? I'm just kidding. We have a beautiful life today. And I'll just close with this, because I think that sometimes in the way I share my story, I walk away after either sharing at a meeting or in a venue like this, and I feel like I ripped on the fellowship a little bit, right? All those women who attempted to help. And I want each and every one of you to know that I couldn't have had access to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous without the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am thankful to each one of those people for reaching out their hand when I needed help, even though I couldn't accept it. But it's our greatest responsibility to present an accurate representation of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. People die from alcoholism, right? People, am I the only one that's been to a few funerals this year? Like, this is a fatal illness. So when we attend meetings, it's incredibly important to make sure that we're carrying that message to the people who need to hear it. Because they don't know what their problem is. They don't know what they're up against. And perhaps maybe we're talking to people who have other problems. And there's guidelines set forth to be able to help with that as well. But sitting in a meeting and sharing about all of the things that I'm grateful for or all of the consequences I'm suffering in does absolutely nothing to benefit anybody in that meeting, not even the person who's speaking about them. But if we can talk openly about our struggles to stay sober and the solution that we found, right? If we can actively take somebody else through our program of action and show them how it is that we experienced what we experienced, that's a fellowship I want to be a part of, right? A fellowship of alcoholics in action. If you think that early sobriety is not a place where you can be of help, you'd be wrong. Because when I was driving to that amends and that girl called me, I think I was only a few months sober. And I was really kind of the last person anybody would call for help, right? Given how much I had been loafing around. But like I said earlier, this is the way that God shows up in my life. Having access to power, right? Having this relationship with something greater than myself. This is the most important relationship in my life today. It's not my husband. It's not my sponsor. It's not my home group. It's not my employer. Because without the relationship with something greater than myself, I can't have any of those things. I don't know how to have those things. Absent of these spiritual principles, absent of that relationship with that power, I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to be a friend. I don't know how to be a sponsor. I don't know how to be a good AA member, because I immediately start serving inwardly, because it's all I know how to do. My 4-step inventory is not a blueprint of who I was. It's a blueprint of who I am without this spiritual relationship in my life. And when I walk away from that spiritual relationship and I start to think that perhaps maybe I know what my solutions need to be or what needs need to be met, I regress quickly. Some of that inventory starts to show up again. These are not old behaviors, they're current behaviors. And I cannot express enough that if you leave with anything this weekend, leave with a little bit of thankfulness and gratitude for that relationship that you might have. And if you don't have a relationship with it, that's what the steps are actually about. They're not about getting to know yourself better. They're not about you keeping you sober. They're about access to power. Apparently we're going to run a big book study workshop tomorrow, and hopefully not irritate too many people. If you are irritated, you can talk to Tony. He's the complaint department. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.